Hello, everyone. Good morning. I hope you are enjoying the talks this morning. So far, they've been great. My name is Pablo Suarez. I am field CTO for the healthcare vertical at WSO2. We are a technology provider offering API management software with integration, middleware capabilities, and a SIAM platform or customer identity access management to enable frictionless user authentications and consent management best practices. And built on top of these technologies, we have a solution offering for open healthcare. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to be here and talk to you about advancing interoperability in healthcare with FHIR-based APIs. So I thought of starting out with a review of the interoperability evolution of electronic information, how it is shifting from document-based exchanges to access-based exchanges, and discuss key factors that influence data interoperability in healthcare to help us better understand or appreciate the challenges and opportunities that exist. We'll then talk about HL7 and what is FHIR, and some of the characteristics that have made FHIR a popular and developer-friendly standard to implement. I'll then go over a high-level blueprint of a data interoperability platform using FHIR, and wrap up with an overview of key legislation that is pushing the adoption of FHIR-based APIs in healthcare, and I'll try to leave a couple minutes at the end for some questions. Interoperability evolution. So if you look at the left, we started with documentation on paper, basically, and using traditional channels like regular mail to move these paper documents. Then we moved to fax machines, and that enabled us to move these paper documents faster. And from there, we went to smart faxes with OCR, or optical character recognition capabilities that allow us to convert paper documents to structured electronic documents that are machine readable, like XML, for example. And we then created and used mechanisms like FTP to exchange these electronic documents. And these electronic documents then evolved into electronic transactions, where the documents now had a definition of their structure and content. And we then moved to web portals, where instead of pushing and pulling documents, we're accessing the information directly on the web portal. And that brings us to the last generation of this evolution, if you will, which is the APIs. And it is through APIs that we create interfaces that enable the access to the information. So we went from packaging documents and sending them across, where all this does is create copies of information as the document travels from one place to another and yet to another, and we end up with multiple copies of the same information, to now having systems access the information at the point of origin. And this access of information is through APIs and a standard like FHIR. Let's now talk about 3 factors that influence data interoperability in healthcare: data model, connectivity approach, and economic and regulatory framework. Data model. This is about the move of content. It is a challenge, but there are some interesting opportunities as we move to the right side towards an access-based exchange approach. The data models at the core of the EHR systems that hospitals and clinics use are proprietary, which makes the exchange of information a little bit more difficult. And in a document-centric approach, the effort to add additional data elements or fields of information is very costly, and the process to implement is very slow. Take a look at the X12 standard, for example, and the last update, version 5010, was more than a decade ago. So what's powerful on this move to the right side towards access-based exchanges for the data layer is that when we move from document regulations to access-based regulations or API-based regulations, there is a 2-for-1 deal on content. It means that every data element has to map to a FHIR resource or open data model. And all of these data will have access-based controls using a smart on FHIR. In other words, by decoupling the access method from the library of contents, we're going to move a lot faster on mapping backend data to open data models. Think of it like Apple TV or Amazon Prime Video. Nothing stops us from adding content, and it's based on your subscription or your business agreements or licensing model that you can view that content accordingly. So the critical thing about this move from document-based exchanges to access-based exchanges is the need to have open data models at the edge for all payers and providers and even government agencies and other stakeholders. And this is what FHIR provides, a common data model at the front. Let's now talk about connectivity approach. This is about having data liquidity and at the same time being compliant with the HIPAA security rule, the minimum data necessary. Again, it's a challenge because it means that every electronic B2B transaction needs a particular legal opinion. Who you are requesting this information is minimum necessary. So think of it like, for example, if I'm sending everything through the network, how do I constrain minimum necessary when the use case in question only needs a subset of this data? I might be oversharing. So it's not a technology issue. It's how do you achieve liquidity objectives with access objectives? So what's powerful about APIs is that they embed governance at the application registration level. So I can have a permissive app, let's say in a value-based care setting, and share all the information I have with my risk-bearing health plans or physician networks, and a different level of access for a subset of my population that is in a fee-for-service model or contract or different use case where I don't want to share all the information I have. So APIs will allow this to happen, and FHIR is designed with APIs. And moving to the last one, economic and regulatory framework. If you noticed, in my previous slide, I put a box around paper, if I can go back, and fax machines, because we still see a lot of paper and fax being used in the healthcare industry. For example, the prior authorization process. This is a data interoperability process where providers have to submit information to payers to obtain approval before a unit of care is rendered, like a hip surgery, knee surgery, or different medical procedures or treatments. And the reason why we see a lot of fax in this particular use case is because there's lack of clarity of what information providers need to submit to payers. So what they end up doing is sending everything they have and let the payer figure out what they need, often resulting in oversharing. But because faxes are not subject to the HIPAA privacy rule, the sender, in this case the provider, is not liable and subject to HIPAA security reviews. There is also an economic case here. It can be more cost-effective to use fax because the HIPAA security rule is expensive and doesn't scale very well. Not only you have minimum data necessary requirements, but you also have to do numerous things with reasonable effort to make sure the transaction is secure. So to get rid of the fax problem, we need to move to a more robust model that enables organizations that want to connect talk to each other. An example would be the proposed rule from CMS using implementation guides from Da Vinci that allow payers to talk directly to EHR systems using FHIR-based APIs. So the key takeaways from these are, we need more open data models for the content to move, and the FHIR standard and regulations are providing that. We need to embed minimum data necessary at the application level token registration and include consent management best practices. And lastly, we need to get off the fax onto something digital without having to spend a lot of money and costing us HIPAA security reviews. And FHIR standard and regulations are giving us a framework to do that. Okay, let's now talk about HL7 and FHIR. HL7, or Health Level 7, is an organization that creates standards for data interoperability in healthcare. HL7 has been around for over 30 years, and it has a global presence where many of its standards are being used, not just here in the US. And the latest standard is FHIR, that offers an alternative to a document-centric approach. And FHIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, pronounced FHIR, hence the FHIR flame logo. FHIR describes data formats and elements known as resources, and an API for exchanging electronic health records. Some of the characteristics from FHIR are, so FHIR consists of resources that are data definitions for information like patient. And here's the data model of the patient resource that includes attributes like name, gender, date of birth, address. There are also FHIR resources for clinical information like allergies, medications, observations. There is more than 100 FHIR resources today, and that number continues to grow. The philosophy behind FHIR is to create a set of resources that individually or in combination satisfy most common use cases. Go back. We also have FHIR profiles, which are a set of constraints on a resource. So here you can specify which data elements you want to use or not use. For example, you may not want to use date of birth for a particular use case from the patient resource. You specify it here. Or you can also specify extensions to add additional data elements or fields of information that are not part of the base specification. And FHIR profiles are also used to specify code sets or terminology like ICD-10, SNOMED, LOINC, for particular data elements like diagnosis, for example. And then you have implementation guides, which is a collection of resources with profiling that are published as a single unit to satisfy a particular use case. An example is the Da Vinci implementation guides on the prior authorization use case. FHIR also supports data formats like XML and JSON, which are also human-readable formats. So it helps the developer to read, follow, even troubleshooting. And each resource has a unique URL, which makes it easy to to access the resource from any application or any device. And again, FHIR is based on APIs, so you pull what you need instead of what's being pushed to you, like it is in a document exchange world. And the design for the common 80% and use extensions for the rest enables us to move a lot faster on open standards that we had ever seen before. In terms of API security, it supports standards like OAuth, OpenID Connect, and HTTPS. But the best of all is that it is open source, freely available for all. There are accelerator programs like DaVinci, which I referenced earlier, and the Gravity project, and a few more, which are essentially work groups with organizations from the public and private sector, including payers, providers, technology vendors, and government agencies, coming together and authoring implementation guides to satisfy or enhance a particular data interoperability use case. And these programs are doing a great job in advancing interoperability with the adoption of FHIR-based APIs. All right, let's now walk through this high-level blueprint of a data interoperability platform in healthcare with FHIR. If you look at the bottom, you have your backend or systems of record. You have your EHR, EMR systems in the case of a provider healthcare organization. You have wearable devices that are collecting data. You have databases. You have SaaS applications for CRM, care management, and many other business functions. And all of these systems are deployed on-prem or in the cloud or a combination of both. And if you are like most organizations, you have more than one system with patient information stored at a particular hospital or across all these data systems. So to address this data siloed problem, you need an integration engine that can go to all these sources and pull the information and aggregate it. But the information most likely will be stored in different data formats. So you're also going to need to run transformations and map it to a different data format for consolidation. In our case, FHIR. So we're going to need to map all these backend data to FHIR resources. Even in the case of EMR or EHR space alone, you could have patient information stored at a hospital that is running Cerner, and the rest of their information is stored at a different hospital running Epic because that patient moved, relocated, or had to see a specialist at a different facility for a particular treatment. So an integration engine is needed. And to assist with this need, you have connectors, you have accelerators that come in with templates that can assist the development and speed up the project timelines and go to market. And the last step is to now expose this information and make it available for others to consume internally within the organization or externally with your partners or third-party app developers to meet regulations. And that's your API management layer. You have an API gateway, a FHIR server with capabilities to support FHIR services. You have API security with OpenID Connect and other features, consent management best practices. And on the left-hand side, you have your API and integration developers using FHIR API definitions, specifications to build these integration workflows and do the mappings required. There is also an observability component on the right-hand side with analytics and the ability to trigger alerts. So this is just a high-level blueprint, but So you need integration capabilities with mapping transformations, and you also need that API management layer to make the exchange of information available. Okay, so let's now talk about legislation that is pushing the adoption of FHIR-based APIs. And that is the 21st Century Cures Act passed in 2016. This was assigned to this legislation that the Department of Health and Human Services assigned it to CMS and the ONC, or the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, to issue guidance that meet the provisions of the Cures Act. And last year, for example, we saw the implementation of the CMS Interoperability Rule for Patient Access API, where payers or insurance companies offering Medicare, Medicaid plans had to make patient data, encounter data, claims, formulary drugs, provider directory, explanation of benefits, make all these data available to third-party app developers via FHIR-based APIs. Similarly, there is another rule called the CMS 9123 that is not yet finalized, and this one is tackling a B2B use cases between data collaboration between providers and payers. And again, this is also using FHIR-based APIs for that exchange. Other efforts are the EHR certification updates. So by the end of this year, EHR vendors will support, and some of them do already, FHIR Release 4 in the EHR system. So that's coming by the end of this year. Very excited about that, along with the ONC information blocking rule, which is a rule to prevent blockage or information sharing by all these healthcare organizations. And very excited about the opportunities that we'll see here to enhance clinical and administrative workflows, as we're going to have now exchanging of information available. And we also have TEFCA, which stands for Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, also known as the Network of Networks. An analogy often used to describe TEFCA is to compare it with the networks of cell phone carriers. For example, even though I'm using AT&T, I'm still able to call and talk to somebody using Verizon or using T-Mobile. So here in healthcare, with TEFCA, I'll be able to run a query for patient information, and that message or that query will be broadcasted to everybody that is participating in TEFCA, and whoever has information will return it. So great expectations about TEFCA, and because of the ability to scale very rapidly. And TEFCA has in its roadmap by 2024 the adoption of FHIR-based APIs. And just one final comment. As we look at this picture of a roadmap or of a road to digital transformation with open data and value-based care as the end goal, because I think we're beginning to enter the middle innings of this digital transformation journey in healthcare. We have achieved now a great deal of digitization using EMR systems and EHR systems to digitize patient health records. Now it's to start digitalizing and using this electronic information. And a standard like FHIR and these regulations like the Cures Act are going to enable us to start innovating and meet the patient expectations, deliver those patient expectations that the consumers of health have been waiting for and are demanding from the healthcare industry to catch up with other industries like banking and retail, for example. And that concludes my presentation. We have an open healthcare sandbox available that you can go and access freely on our website. And if there are any questions, we're happy to take them now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you. We have a comment online that they say, this guy is on fire, but it was for the joke, right? You know, the FHIR standard, right?
Yes.
So
let's all get fired up now.
OK, so do we have any questions for Pablo on healthcare? Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm just curious if you think that there's anywhere where legislation didn't go far enough, or if there's anything missing from what's currently been passed, either in legislation or in the ONC rules.
Sorry, is the last part?
Either in legislation or the ONC rules.
I mean, yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge. I mean, like, with for instance, enforcing some of the information blocking rule from the ONC, with the access of data, shifting that mindset of now, this is in your data as a data holder organization, let's say providers or payer, that you have to make this data available. I think that's going to be a challenge. I think with TEFCA, it's also going to be a challenge with consent management, because it's distributing the consent for every organization to manage that, rather than having a centralized hub that could govern those consent management practices. I think India, the National Health Institute of India, has a different model that has a centralized repo for managing consent management. So everybody that wants to get information goes there first to get the consent management. And then, so there's different options available, but it's going to be a challenge. I think we're beginning to at least have those discussions that can advance interoperability, but we'll see how it goes in the coming months.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you for being there with us. We can have some applause for Pablo. Thank you. Yeah.